This is Toreno Beckford's crime control policy, Operation New Horizon, which is a structured and strategic policy drafted to direct Jamaica's war on crime. Crime is the most destructive immediate force within the Jamaican society. Most Jamaican families have lost at least one victim to crime, and our freedom to enjoy this beautiful island is jeopardized by the constant threat of crime. Therefore, as Jamaicans, we can all agree that crime is an enemy of the people of Jamaica. And so, we should all unite in fighting and exposing the individuals in our society who support, facilitate, or take part in criminal activity, regardless of how connected they are. Jamaica's crime problem is intolerable, and all citizens must uphold their civic duty, and aid in the destruction of Jamaica's culture of crime. In order to accurately and effectively fight Jamaica's unique crime problem, a structured and well-strategized solution must be implemented, by leaders with vision, foresight, and a genuine desire to eliminate crime from the Jamaican society. So, without further ado, here is Toreno Beckford's crime control policy, Operation New Horizon, which is a strategic 21st-century approach to crime management. Chapter 1. Purging Politics of Corruption. As a candidate for the position of Head of State of Jamaica, Toreno Beckford intends on making crime management a top priority. Since we all know that there exists a built-in system of corruption in Jamaica's political system, we should have no trouble understanding how politics contribute to, and enable the nation's crime problem. For instance, politicians establish garrison communities by installing local dons in low-income communities. During the elections, the politicians then supply guns to the dons and his cronies, who are also recruited from the garrison communities. These dons are then instructed to use intimidation and force, in order to compel the members of these communities to vote for a particular political party or candidate. After the election, the politicians who almost immediately start to neglect their constituencies, never bother to retrieve these guns from the dons, whom they also neglect until the next election. And thus, a desperate and well-armed group of politically connected gangsters tend to be responsible for a large percentage of the crimes in Jamaica, due to this one established method of political corruption. Therefore, in order to achieve a crime-free Jamaica, Toreno Beckford must make it a priority to target and prosecute corrupt politicians, who arm garrison communities. By severing the ties between politics and street crimes, these dons, gangs, and notorious gunmen are left with no political protection whatsoever, and will no longer be untouchable by the police, who can immediately arrest them, since it's already widely known who these politically controlled dons are. A society dominated by crime tend to have criminal politicians in charge, who allow such a crime problem to fester, and therefore, it is unrealistic to attempt any crime-fighting strategy, without first targeting the politicians who protect criminal dons, and sabotage genuine police investigations. Chapter 2. Reorganizing the Armed Forces. Since the police force and the military by extension are the actual enforcers of law and order, it should come at no surprise that our armed forces must be reformed to better serve the vision of a crime-free Jamaica. Performance and capacity assessment. The best way to reorganize the armed forces in order to better achieve a crime-free Jamaica, is to remove members of the police force who engage in criminal activities, frequently use unwarranted force, or generally underperform. These bad apples within law enforcement tend to tip off criminals about police investigations, inform on members of the public who give information on criminal cases, and cooperate with the criminal underworld. Therefore, after the undesirables are removed from the force, upstanding members of society will then be recruited to replace them, and a reserve armed force will be maintained in order to increase the number of our armed forces on occasions when crime is rapidly escalating. This strategy will give the people a law-abiding and capable police force that they can feel safe confiding in, and providing information to about criminal activities. One of the reasons why Jamaicans hesitate in giving information to the police, or inform, as it is locally referred to, is because corrupt members of the police force who cooperate with criminals and corrupt politicians tend to expose citizens who give information, and make them a target for criminals. With a police force under constant monitoring for corruption and underperformance, the people will be more willing to overcome their inhibitions and cooperate with the police whenever they have knowledge of a crime. Advanced training and resources. Another strategy is to source experts in law enforcement, forensics, and special forces training to properly train the armed forces of Jamaica, to be better able to combat the high-level criminal activities that are destroying the nation, and to solve the many unsolved crimes that increase in numbers daily. Police patrol protocols will be introduced in order to increase the safety of officers on patrol, and traffic stop protocols will be introduced to prepare officers for the dangers they might face during a random traffic stop. Equally as important, is modern equipment and adequate resources dedicated to crime management. The criminal elements are known to be armed with the latest weapons, and pose a danger to police officers on duty. Therefore, in order to preserve the life, and assure the safety of the nation's armed forces, they must be equipped with the most advanced weaponry, and the latest crime-fighting technology. Weaponized drones should be used to neutralize hostile criminal elements, so that the armed forces can avoid risking their lives in certain active shooter situations. Bulletproof glass shields should be used by the armed forces during operations, to significantly reduce the chances of sustaining bullet-related injuries. Large-caliber rifles and explosives should be issued to the armed forces, so that they can always outgun and outmaneuver the criminals. An emphasis on forensics would see our law enforcement agencies accessing state-of-the-art forensic labs, and incorporating modern crime-fighting strategies into Jamaica's war on crime. Many of the unsolved crimes can be solved through the use of DNA evidence, fingerprint analysis, and other modern forensic techniques that can assist in finding suspects, and compiling strong cases against them. There are other equipments such as non-lethal weapons, armored vehicles, sniper rifles, and bomb squad suits, that can aid in the efficient execution of police operations, and so, we must equip the police force and the military with the tools and training necessary to effectively fight Jamaica's audacious criminal elements. Salary and concessions. Rationally speaking, we cannot expect police officers who feel underpaid to effectively fight crime and not engage in financial corruption. The authority given to the armed forces gives them the option of engaging in a whole host of corrupt activities in order to make ends meet, and so, it is advised that a reasonable cost of living adjustment, relative to inflation, be made to their salaries. Additionally, the armed forces are persons who chose to protect and serve, and therefore, it is dishonorable to not provide them with a reasonable salary, while they risk their lives protecting our country. Another strategy for empowering our armed forces, is to provide them with incentives, concessions, and occupational safety nets. Therefore, the police force and the military will be provided with a retirement fund, to aid in subsidizing their pensions after retirement, because the cost of living tend to rise on fixed-income earners, like pensioners. They will also be provided with a health fund, to fund the medical care of any member of the armed forces who are injured while on duty. Additionally, they will be provided with a legal aid fund, to assist in the cost of litigation incurred during the execution of their duties. The nature of the police and military professions tend to attract litigation, and so, we must support our officers financially through their litigation process, until and only if they are found guilty, then naturally, they will be expected to reimburse the fund. Chapter 3. Reforming the Witness Protection Program. One of the reasons why Jamaicans are unwilling to share information with the police about crimes that they know of, is because people fear retaliation from criminal elements, especially politically controlled dons and organized crime groups. So, in order to get our people to feel safe sharing information about crime, we must offer them both protection and incentives for cooperating. Therefore, Toreno Beckford will reform the Witness Protection Program, to adequately protect potential witnesses and informants. The public will be offered a $1 million reward, and a spot in our newly reformed Witness Protection Program, in exchange for information and testimony regarding crimes being committed throughout Jamaica. In this newly reformed Witness Protection Program, citizens who choose to come forward with information about notorious and connected criminals, will be immediately debriefed and flown out of the country to an undisclosed location. They are then open to testify in court if necessary, via video testimony, in order to aid in securing a conviction, while never putting the victim in harm's way. While in the undisclosed location, the witness will then be given the reward money, and be allowed to relocate to any country of their choice. This option will be made available, by establishing a treaty at the UN level, to encourage all nations to cooperate in protecting witnesses on a quid pro quo basis. This cautious strategy of protecting witnesses will reassure faith in the witness protection program, and encourage Jamaicans to be more willing to come forward and assist in solving crimes. Additionally, the anti-informer culture, where Jamaicans condemn those who give information to the police, will gradually fade away, as the people realize that they can trust the police force, after the reforms previously discussed are implemented. In simple terms, once Jamaicans realize that they can get money and a new life overseas, in return for information on criminals, tips and testimony will be coming from all over the country, and a lot of these unsolved cases will eventually be solved, giving closure to many people. The Defector Initiative. The most lucrative source of criminal intelligence is from the criminals themselves, in the form of informants and criminal turncoats. This is why the Witness Protection Program should be modernized and adequately funded. Criminal informants and arrested criminals can then feel safe becoming a government informant, knowing that their cooperation will be rewarded with safe relocation and a new life. This tactic will be effective at gathering information on the elusive scammer and gang networks. By offering reduced sentences to scammers and gang members that are arrested, they will be more willing to become government witnesses, and testify against a whole host of other criminals that they work alongside. This strategy, which is called the Defector Initiative, will be used to gather a wide range of criminal activities directly from the actual criminal participants, who tend to know the criminal underworld more than anyone else. Chapter 4. Intelligence Gathering and Civilian Participation. In order to accurately direct police operations and deploy law enforcement resources, there needs to be a wealth of up-to-date intelligence on the criminals, their operations, and their movements. Since the general public is the next best source on information about criminal activities, there should exist structured means by which the public can play a role in crime fighting. Neighborhood Watch. As head of state, Toreno Beckford would develop a neighborhood watch in every community throughout Jamaica, in order to use vigilant citizens to track the movement of criminals and report suspicious activities. So, whenever citizens see a strange man in their community, they can alert law enforcement to investigate whether the person is a wanted man in hiding. Since criminals tend to relocate from ZOSO and SOE areas, this strategy can assist the police in tracking the movement of criminal elements throughout the country. As criminals move to different parishes and communities, neighborhood watch groups can alert the police to strange individuals, so that the police can verify if they are wanted in any other parts of the country. The police would need a computerized database with all suspects and wanted individuals constantly updated, for this strategy to effectively work. Community Call to Action. As previously demonstrated, one of the best weapons to deploy against criminals is the law-abiding citizens themselves. In many close-knit communities, where citizens share a mutual concern for the encroachment of crime and violence, the citizens can band together and defend each other from crime. Citizens can exchange phone numbers with neighbors and alert others in case of an emergency, such as burglary. Citizens can also install electrical bells to their homes which are triggered by a panic button. These bells can be used to warn the neighborhood that a home is experiencing an emergency due to criminal activities. These bells can act as more affordable home alarm systems and can even discourage intruders who are deterred by the unwarranted attention. Civilian Policing. Licensed firearm holders can act as community first responders, and assist in saving the lives of community members from crime. Citizens can be empowered to patrol and police their communities, while working closely with the police for guidance and direction. This civilian police force can be effective at discouraging criminals from entering into certain communities, but it is not recommended for use in many criminally active communities that require strictly police and military intervention. Arming responsible citizens. There are many responsible adult Jamaicans who could play a role in crime fighting by protecting themselves, their loved ones, their property, and even their communities in general, only if they could afford to purchase a licensed firearm. It is envisioned that if more responsible citizens have guns, then they will be able to defend themselves and others from criminals. There are two factors influencing this crime-fighting strategy. 1. The police cannot be everywhere at once, and in most cases, the police are only able to show up at your crime scene, rather than being able to show up in time to save your life. 2. The police have not been able to stop the gun flow into the country. And so, while the criminals have no problem acquiring weapons, and any Jamaican can get a gun by tomorrow if they want to become a gunman, the law-abiding citizens are left unarmed by the government. For example, it is illegal to possess a pair of scissors in public in Jamaica, even if you just bought them. It was traditionally held that the government had a ban on even stun guns and pepper sprays, but since the outcry condemning violence against women, such a ban has seemingly been lifted. Therefore, Toreno Beckford advises all Jamaicans, especially women, to acquire stun guns and pepper sprays, for personal defense. These instruments of personal protection can give a person a fighting chance when confronted by criminals. Additionally, as head of state, Toreno Beckford intends on arming responsible Jamaicans, by subsidizing their acquisition of firearms. There are responsible citizens who wouldn't misuse, or negligently handle or store a firearm, and would only use it for protection purposes. However, too many of these people simply don't have the finance or the motivation to acquire a licensed firearm, and are left vulnerable to the well-armed criminal population. With more responsible citizens having guns, criminals will increasingly think twice before committing crimes, especially in public. The audacious daytime crimes that we've become all too accustomed to will gradually decrease, as licensed firearm holders continue to gun down unsuspecting criminals. In order to not have this policy abused, the Firearm Licensing Authority must see to it that only responsible citizens get the approval to acquire a licensed firearm. Therefore, a background check, a mental assessment, and a personal training course will become mandatory for all citizens who apply for a firearm. However, those of low-income background who meet the standard of a responsible gun owner can apply for gun subsidy and receive assistance from the government. This policy will see to it that the privilege of having a firearm is not strictly reserved for the upper class. Licensed firearm holders will additionally be trained for participation in the civilian police force, and will therefore be able to assist in the protection of their families and their communities. Cash reward for information. Arguably one of the most effective strategies for attracting the public's participation in solving crimes, is to offer an attractive cash reward. The unappreciated reality in our society, is that persons who are not involved, tend to know about the individuals responsible for many of the murders being committed, and in many cases will gladly accept a cash reward to provide information and expose those responsible. Coupled with the newly reformed Witness Protection Program, citizens will become more emboldened to expose criminals that they know of, and law enforcement will eventually receive more tips and information from the public. By placing huge bounties on the heads of criminals who commit crimes, such as murdering children, a majority of the population will become motivated to take part in solving such a crime. This is the cooperation and the involvement that is required to eliminate crime from the Jamaican society. The Crime Stop Reward Fund should be expanded to provide reward money for the increasing number of people who is anticipated to provide information to law enforcement. Chapter 5. Advancingananda Alert. The safety of our children should be a top priority for our nation. If we don't adequately protect our children, then we are compromising the future of our nation. We should always seek to improve child safety policies when we see fit, in order to maintain an edge over the dangers that target our children. With that being said, here is a list of ideas that will improve our ability to keep our children safe. Number 1. Immediately as a child goes missing, the police should circulate clearly identifiable pictures and a biography of the missing child. At bus parks, transport centers, gas stations, on public billboards. At hospitals, to all police officers on patrol, especially at roadblocks. And to all taxi operators. Number 2. When a child goes missing, normal television broadcasts should immediately be interrupted, so that the media can inform the nation of information related to the missing child. Additionally, information about missing children should be broadcasted to smartphones in order to inform people on the go, or those who don't keep up with current affairs, so that they can join in the lookout for missing children. Number 3. Children should be provided with emergency trackers that they can activate when in danger. These trackers should be disguised, so that kidnappers don't see the need to separate them from the child during a kidnapping. Number 4. A missing children's fund should be formed, in order to raise reward money for persons who aid in the process of finding missing children, and apprehending their offenders. This fund also encourages the full involvement of the public in the child protection process, since people will be motivated by the financial incentive. Number 5. A sex offender and a human trafficking registry should be established, and offenders should be required to inform their neighbors of their offense. If an ex-convict who was convicted of sex crimes against children lives in a particular community, then that community deserves to know about that person, so that they can take the necessary precautions to protect the children. Number 6. Teach children important safety tips on how to avoid strangers and dangerous situations. Children's safety tips should be incorporated in our schools, and in television programs aimed at spreading safety awareness among children. Number 7. Parents should consider assigning designated taxis to drop their children off at school, and to return them home safely. Not everyone can afford to hire a taxi, so special taxi operators should be tasked with transporting only school children. Also, the Ministry of Education should consider introducing more school buses throughout the country. Number 8. Torino Beckford will form a dedicated task force to investigate offenses against children and the elderly, so that it becomes customary to solve these immoral crimes that target the most vulnerable members of our society. 9. The police force will be encouraged to carry out sting operations, to target taxi operators who use their profession to target unsuspecting children. By constantly setting up sting operations and targeting child abductors, those considering the act in the future will become less motivated, and thus, child abductions will become less frequent. Too often we see children being harmed or going missing in Jamaica, and we must never get used to it or feel helpless about it. At this point we need nothing short of a resolute approach to protecting our nation's children. The objective of the ideas previously outlined, is to make it as difficult as possible for the kidnappers and human traffickers to abduct children, and to successfully relocate them without facing a great risk of being caught. This will help to dissuade many future incidences of child abduction, as the extra attention placed on missing children will deter many into thinking twice before considering the act. I know that not all the cases of missing children are due to abduction, and therefore might not require such urgency. However, this is a precautionary measure that we should strictly enforce, in order to offer an extra layer of protection to our nation's children. We owe it to our children, and to the struggle against crime and violence, to keep our child protection protocols as updated as possible. Chapter 6. Prison Work Program. Since Jamaica's society is dominated by crime, that implies that there are a lot of potential prisoners out there, waiting to be arrested and prosecuted. This inevitability would require Jamaican taxpayers to pay to house and feed a large population of inmates. To avoid this unwarranted expense on the taxpayers, it is recommended that the nation's prison population be put to labor, in order to cover the cost of their incarceration. Torino Beckford intends on establishing a prison work program, which involves mobilizing the prison population to become productive members of society, and contribute value to the society that they destabilized with their criminal offenses. Prisoners can be made to assist in the construction of hospitals, roads, bridges, police stations, and homes for the poor and vulnerable. By allowing prisoners to work and earn an income, they will be able to support their families, cover the cost of their incarceration, and contribute back to society. By offering educational courses to prisoners, they will be able to improve their career prospects, and be better able to earn an income upon release, which will give them a financial alternative to crime. Additionally, prisoners will receive routine therapy sessions, in order to aid in their moral and psychological rehabilitation, so that they are less likely to return to a life of crime, and end up being repeat offenders. These policies significantly increase the nation's potential to eliminate crime, since incarcerating prisoners won't cost taxpayers anything, and prisoners will possess valuable skills that can give them pride and a financial alternative to criminal activities upon their release. The prison work program will also deter repeat offenders, since work becomes compulsory, and many of the privileges that they currently enjoy will no longer be available. Since prisoners will no longer be a burden on state resources, the prevailing idea that extrajudicial killings should be used to eliminate high-level offenders, who tend to evade prosecution, can be avoided. The underlying reality behind our nation's crime problem is that many of these offenders are simply garrison residents, who are criminalized and victimized by a corrupt backwards political system that requires bullets to accompany ballots in an election. Other factors such as poverty, lack of education, unequal opportunities, and a lack of positive role models contribute to the systemic criminalization of the nation's youths. Therefore, the prison reforms previously suggested, will give these offenders the option of changing their lives during incarceration, instead of being killed by frustrated offers who are eager to prevent them from continuing a life of crime. There is a realistic motivation for extrajudicial killings among law enforcement, and even the Jamaican people, who many times openly recommend it as a solution to the nation's crime problem. The prosecution's failure to prosecute criminals, force police officers to consider extrajudicial killings, because arresting these repeat offenders will only lead to their release after another failed trial. This is evident in the highly publicized Klansman trial, where gangsters are walking free because the prosecution is unable to secure a conviction. The police officers who arrest these gangsters become frustrated with the failure of the court system to put them away. And, so, in order to not have these officers resort to extrajudicial killings, the prosecution must advance its trial tactics, and use supporting legislation to put away these criminals in the prison work program for life.